Walking these streets, shadows fall, lost in a world, echoes call, searching for light, voices true, St. James Church in the heart of the blue. Glorify God, nurture all, share the gospel, hear the call. That is what we do at St. James, breaking chains, singing new names, pushing through the night, feeling small, seeking the answers stall, windows of gray, stained with hue.
You got green? Okay. Okay, so we weren't going. Yeah, okay. Welcome to our 75th anniversary talks. We're here with Dr. Nathan Greeley, who's a member of our congregation and sharing his experiences here at St. James. So how and when did you join the congregation? What's kind of your background that got you into Lutheranism?
Well, it's kind of a long story because I did not grow up Lutheran. I grew up in a Baptist church.
Oh.
And when I was in my 20s, started to think about where I should be going to church and what tradition I should belong to, and various theological questions were becoming important to me. And eventually I was drawn to the Anglican tradition because I liked how historical it was and I liked the liturgy. So I was drawn to how they worship, I was drawn to the richness of the tradition. And so my wife and we were going to an Episcopal church for a little bit. But eventually I became dissatisfied with certain aspects of that church and of Anglicanism too, because I realized that within Anglicanism you have a very broad diversity of views on all kinds of things. And I found that troubling because I felt like there was really no consensus about what the scriptures taught and about what Christians should believe and affirm. So I started looking elsewhere and realized that the Lutheran tradition was probably the closest thing to the Anglican tradition, but I also noticed that it didn't seem to have this issue with the doctrinal latitude that you see in Anglicanism.
Oh, okay.
Right? So there was a lot more consensus about what Christians should believe and what they should uphold, and that obviously stems from having a strong commitment to a particular confession, right, or a book of confessions, which you don't really have in Anglicanism. In Anglicanism, there are some historical documents that they see as important and as historically significant, but they're not really authoritative in the way that the confessions in the Book of Concord are. So what I saw in Lutheranism was that you have this strong sense of identity, which is lacking in a lot of other churches. You also have this historical rootedness. You have this connection to the entire history of the church, which was certainly lacking in the Baptist church that I grew up in, because in the Baptist tradition, it's kind of like you have the apostles, and then like the church is non-existent practically for hundreds of years, for centuries, and then the church comes back, in the 1600s or whatever, with the First Baptists. So that was an understanding of history that was unappealing to me. So anyways, getting back to Lutheranism was historically rooted. It saw itself in continuity with the church throughout the centuries, both the church fathers and the medieval church, even though, it was critical of those thinkers and those their traditions in different ways. It also didn't ever want to just throw them out altogether.
Right.
So there was like a critical appropriation always. That was the goal. And so Lutheranism had those connections to history, had the liturgical worship, which was very attractive to me. I just really liked having that formality in worship. I liked having, and that's also a part of the historical rootedness, because the liturgy obviously goes very far back into history, right? So
Right.
that was important to me, and I just felt like the doctrine, or came to believe that the doctrine is true and is entirely scriptural. So all of these things drew me to Lutheranism. When I initially started coming here, it was in 2016. So the first Sunday I visited was Palm Sunday in 2016.
Oh, wow.
And I was at that point, I think I had just started reading the Book of Concord, and I was still working through some things, trying to see if this was something I could totally get behind or get on board with.
Sure.
Because for me, that was very important. I wasn't, I've always been the type of person that temperamentally, if I'm going to get into something, I have to like go in 100%, right?
Sure,
So I wasn't going to be able to be like Lutheran with reservations. Like I
Right.
wasn't going to be able to go to a Lutheran church and not be totally committed to Lutheran teaching.
Sure.
So I was reading the Book of Concord and studying those documents and working through different questions I had. And eventually, I got to the point relatively soon, within a year probably, where I was totally sure that this is where I belonged, and that this is the right spiritual home for me and for my family. So my wife and I joined the church the next year,
Okay.
during the 500th
Oh, really?
anniversary.
Nice.
So that was kind of cool.
2017. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've been here ever since, and it's been a good place to be.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting about the historical question, because I've had non-denominational and Baptist friends say, you talk about what the church fathers in the first 700 centuries. They go, well, that was the Roman Catholic Church. And I go, no, that was the church.
Right.
That was the church, and a lot of the doctrine too that is in some of those churches was not even developed until the last 100 or couple hundred years. Some of it, scarily enough. So yeah.
So a lot of what Lutherans object to was invented much later.
Yeah.
And it's true that that's not, for Lutherans at least, that's a part of our history. We don't see that as something other, something that is alien or foreign to us.
Right.
And we approach that stuff, like I said, critically. We always sift it in light of Scripture. We always say, what can we retain and what do we need to discard? But we definitely don't see those people as being unbelievers. We don't see them as being outside of our tradition.
Right.
And we think that we have a lot to learn from them. So that's something I've always appreciated about Lutheranism.
Sure. So, what are some roles or positions you've held here at the church?
Well, the first thing I did was I joined the evangelism committee, and I served on that committee for a few years. I also, at some point, I don't remember when exactly, started helping with distributing communion, and I was a lector now and again. And then in 2021, I think I was asked to join the elder board. So I've been on the elder board for about 4 years now, and I started teaching adult Sunday school last fall.
Yeah.
So it'll be about a year in August or September. I've been doing that.
And you've been teaching on like Luther's Small Catechism and some other books.
The Large Catechism. So we started with the Large Catechism. And then we moved on to a book by Gene Veith, who is a very popular Lutheran author. And he wrote a book called Embracing Your Lutheran Identity, which is basically all about the history of Lutheranism and what's distinctive about Lutheranism and why Lutheran teaching is important. And that's been a really good study, and one I would recommend to anybody who's watching this. I think it would be beneficial for virtually any layperson to kind of get to know their faith better and understand a bit more about who we are and where we come from and why we do the things we do.
Sure. So who are some people that had a big impact on you at St. James?
Well, I'd say the guys on the elder board, the gentlemen that I serve with on that board, have certainly made an impression, and they've helped me in different ways. They've kind of shown me the ropes. They've shown me the kinds of things that we need to do to care for the congregants here and to make sure the church stays on the right track. So that's been helpful in many ways. Joe in particular has always been very helpful to me, and he's, guided me in different ways. So I've appreciated that. And, there are just other people in the congregation who have been really kind and really encouraging to me in different ways, like Barry Boyer, for example, and Joe Stevens, Tom Shabo. So the whole congregation, I feel like, is just, we're all very supportive of each other. It's an encouraging congregation. It's a friendly congregation. It's a congregation in which pretty much everybody can, I think, feel at home and find kindred spirits and find people that are going to, just assist them and help them to grow. So it's been great.
Now, you're on your second book, right? I saw that your second book is coming out. What was your first book about?
So the first book was an introduction to apologetics from a Lutheran perspective or standpoint. But it was primarily just focused on Christian apologetics in general. So there was one chapter that focused on Lutheranism, but for the most part, it was just the kinds of typical subjects or topics that you see in an apologetics book. So it's like the existence of God and the problem of evil and the resurrection and things like that, the truthfulness of Scripture and so forth. So I think that book was aimed at lay people. The whole idea was that it would be something that would be very accessible. I was trying to make it as easy to read as possible, as easy to understand as possible. And I think it was largely successful in doing that. However, I think that the book itself was not really distinctive, besides that chapter on Lutheranism, just because there's so many books out there that deal with that topic. So the topic of apologetics, and which isn't to say that I don't think it's a good book. I think it is, and I think it accomplishes what it's supposed to.
Yeah.
I'm actually planning on revising it and, adding some more material. Kind of looking at certain things a little bit more deeply and addressing some issues that I didn't address in the first edition. So I think it was a good book, but I also think that there are a lot of books out there, so it's hard to stand out when you're writing a book like that. That's basically what I'm getting at. The second book is rather unique in that I'm not really aware of another book like it. So I would say that the second book has the potential at least to be a more significant book, and that's something that I'm happy about. So the second book is focused on how Lutherans should think about the relationship between philosophy and theology. And that's obviously connected to apologetics because a lot of apologetics does have to do with philosophy.
Sure.
But I don't know of another book that really takes on that same topic, at least one that's been written in recent times. Like if you were to go back hundreds of years, I think you would find some old Lutheran books written in Latin that would talk about this. But I don't know of anything in English written in recent decades that addresses quite this topic in quite the way that I'm looking at it. So there are a few resources out there on like how Lutherans should think about reason and how faith and reason are connected, but I don't think that they explore the topic in quite the same way that I do, and I don't think that they go into quite the depth that I do. So hopefully that book will be a helpful resource for people. It'll be something that will help them to think through these issues and to come to their own opinion. I don't think that Lutherans have to necessarily see this question in the same way. There's some room for disagreement.
Sure.
But I do think that what I've proposed is an account that's very faithful to the Lutheran tradition, and I think it's one that will resonate hopefully with a lot of Lutherans. It draws mostly on figures like Philip Melanchthon, who of course was a very important reformer who worked with Luther and wrote some of our confessions. It also draws on Johann Gerhardt, who is maybe my favorite Lutheran theologian. He wrote quite a bit on this topic, and a lot of it's, I think, of great value.
Now, when did he live?
He lived in the late 1500s and early 1600s.
Okay. So he was kind of a contemporary of Luther, or kind of after Luther?
He came after Luther. Okay. So he was kind of in he worked in this period that's usually referred to as Lutheran Orthodoxy, which kind of extends from the end of the Book of Concord, when that was published in 1580, up until about 1700.
Oh,
So
okay.
you have this period called the period of Lutheran Orthodoxy, where you have just a large number of Lutheran writers producing a tremendous amount of theological work, also writing a lot of great hymns and devotional writings and things. So it was a very rich period in the history of Lutheranism. It's one that tends to get neglected because all of this writing was written in German or Latin,
Right, right.
and so it's not accessible to a lot of people today, and not a lot of it has not been translated. But it really is a very rich vein of theological insight that can be mined. So
Yeah, when I was in seminary, we had to read Martin Chemnitz.
yeah,
A lot of Martin Chemnitz.
Right. So
Which
Chemnitz comes
is
from like the very beginning of that time period.
yeah.
And he also is a tremendous writer, tremendous resource. I don't really engage much with him in this book, but I certainly could have, used his works in some way or other. So Melanchthon, Gerhardt, those guys play a very significant role. And then I also found some writings by Robert Preuss to be really useful to me. So Robert Preuss was a very significant figure in the LCMS in the 20th century. He was a president at Concordia Seminary, Fort Wayne, and
his last year was my first year.
Oh, okay.
And I actually had him he substituted in a confessions course, but yeah, his last year at seminary was was my first year.
So you met him personally?
Yeah.
So I've always found his writings to be very, very useful, and I think he's just an outstanding writer, an outstanding authority on the Lutheran tradition, and so he comes up quite a bit too. I refer to him quite a bit. So yeah, one thing I've tried to do though with this book too, just like the first book, is I've tried to make it very accessible. So good. Everything is intended for just the interested lay reader. It's not for scholars necessarily. I mean, if they'll presumably find something of value in it too. At least I hope so. But it's primarily intended for people that have not maybe given much thought to this topic before, or have not had the time to explore it before. It's going to hopefully help them to clarify their thinking on this.
Yeah, I think sometimes that people shy away from that because they go, well, those guys wrote so long ago, but But when you read them, they're very relevant.
Sure.
I mean, they really come across as they might as well have been in our time because
One thing I like about Lutheranism, particularly confessional Lutheranism, and particularly the Missouri Synod, is that we see those people very much as contemporaries. Like we don't. It's not like that's like old stuff that we now feel like we're free to ignore.
Right.
We still see those theologians from the 1500s and the 1600s as being very influential and very authoritative for us, like people we need to pay attention to and people we can learn a lot from.
Right.
It's very interesting. The official, as you know, the official like systematic theology or dogmatics textbook in the LCMS for the past 100 years has been Francis Pepys' Christian Dogmatics.
Yeah.
And if you read that book, he's citing these guys constantly, these older guys. Like it's almost like he's basically just taking their theology and transplanting it to the 20th century. I think that's a good way of describing it. So it's very much in continuity with those guys. He's not saying anything new, really. He's just kind of contextualizing what they said and putting it in this different historical setting. But we've always wanted to maintain ties to our past. We've always wanted to make sure that our teaching is not departing from the things that they wanted to emphasize back then.
Yeah, it's interesting because we just came out with a new catechism 2017, but some other denominations come out with a new catechism, and they mean different things by that, because new catechism means, well, we've got some new thoughts on our doctrine, and our new catechisms, the doctrine's the same. We just go, well, here's some topics that maybe weren't addressed previously because they weren't topics before. I like that 2017 catechism. The catechism is the catechism, it hasn't changed, but the explanations are more up to date.
I have a few different editions of the Concordia Publishing Catechism, the small catechism, and it's interesting. Everyone seems to get a little bit thicker than the previous one. But like you said, it's not like the content is not, it's expanding, but it's not really changing in the sense that the older truths are still being affirmed, and those are the core of who we are.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's one thing I love about confessional Lutheranism. People talk about how like, oh, I want to become Catholic or I want to become Eastern Orthodox because, those churches are so old and they're so tied to tradition and they're, you can depend on them to not
Right.
change with the times. Well, that's a little debatable, but
Yeah. Exactly.
my point is that we have that in Lutheranism too.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a tradition that doesn't bend with the times. It doesn't adapt to the times, right? I mean, like I said, we obviously try to make our teaching understandable to people in the
Mm-hmm.
present. We want to make it living and significant for them. We want to show them its relevance, but we're not pandering or we're not shaping or changing things to be relevant,
Right.
And I think that provides a stability and a continuity through history that I think is very important. And when people are looking for that, I think Lutheranism should be something that they look into because
Mm-hmm.
it's not just the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox that can claim to have these long-standing traditions that, I think actually if you look at Roman Catholicism, I think that has changed a lot more than Lutheranism has in the last 500 years.
A lot. And I mean, we just recently, with the election of the new pope, that was one of the questions that went. Well, is this a pope that's going to, go back, or is he a pope that's going to continue the reforms? And it's like, well, yeah, that's not a question we would really ask Lutherans because we're not going to continue any reforms.
We see the Reformation as being finished.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of staying faithful to it. That's the only real question. So you don't have to worry about your church changing on you in the Missouri Synod. And that's something that, obviously, we did have, there was a question back in the 60s and 70s, like what direction we were going to go in. But that question was answered, resoundingly, and I think with a strong sense of finality. And there hasn't really been significant debate about who we are since that time, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. Because if anything, I think the Missouri Synod as a whole is just getting more conservative and more traditional over time.
Yeah, that's been kind of a big cultural thing that's been talked about a lot because it's controversial in some ways, but I know a lot of our church leaders have come out, and I think they're nailing it right on the head when they said, well, what we've seen is some of these other guys like Jordan Peterson and who is it, the Roman Catholic priest? Barron come out and say things that are really drawing in young men in their 20s and 30s who have been kind of put through this wokeism where manhood and everything else has been questioned. That resonated with that. And I think it was Peter Scare that made the comment. He goes, we've been teaching those same teachings in the church for years, but we've been kind of shy about it because we don't want to offend anybody. We've kind of backed off and feminized the church. And he says, we need to probably teach what we should have been teaching a little better because there is clarity, hungering for that of people going, because there's so much with all that cultural stuff that came out, the woke agenda, there was so much instability. And because it was kind of an anti-God movement. And so moving to stability, it's why one of the reasons we're moving kind of toward family ministry here is that we want stability that, but stability the Word of God provides, what the Word of God actually says. And maybe we've shied off a little bit too much in that trying to be relevant and with the times. And I think it's actually more relevant to be what we are.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, issues of identity are huge in our culture, and everybody, I think, understands in some sense that like having a strong identity, having a strong sense of who you are, is essential for your health. Your mental, your spiritual health, and churches need to provide that for people because obviously the culture is really failing to do that, and so. I think that Lutheranism is in a unique position within Protestantism to provide that. I don't know. I mean, I can't think of another Protestant church that has all of the characteristics that we've been talking about and can actually, give those to congregants, give those to the people in our churches Anglicanism, like I said, there was a lot that appealed to me about Anglicanism, but doctrinally, because it was all over the place,
Yeah.
it also had identity issues. It like if you ask any 10 Anglicans what Anglicanism is all about, you're going to get 10 different answers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that might be a slight exaggeration, but it's not much of one.
Right.
And for that reason, I don't think that church can provide what our church can. And so anybody who, is looking for a strong sense of identity, wants roots, wants a sense of, a strong sense of who they are and what they're doing and what God has called them to do, vocation and whatnot. There's not a better home for you than here. Like I said, the Roman Catholic Church, a lot of what they claim to offer is, not really all it's cracked up to be,
Right.
Because that church also seems to be going through a lot of changes.
Yeah.
And, another problem with those churches, of course, is that their teaching is not scriptural, right? So
Right.
in many, many ways, at least. So, I think if you scan or survey the landscape of churches in America today, nothing compares to the Lutheran Church. Obviously, there's Lutheran churches that also have gone off the rails and
Yeah.
are not really Lutheran anymore. But when I talk about confessional Lutheranism, I think that we offer something that no one else does.
Yeah. I think that's true. That's true. So what are some challenges you would say that we face as a church and maybe Lutheran Church at large faces today?
Well, it's not going to surprise you to just hear that it's all about demographics, right? It's just all a question of numbers and of, we have older populations and sadly, our churches are going to shrink significantly in the next 20 to 30 years. So the question is, what can we do? What can be done to address that? It's a hard question to answer because there are lots of other churches that are also facing these problems.
Yeah.
It's not just the Lutheran tradition of the Lutheran churches. So we all kind of want more people in our pews, of course,
Right.
but there's kind of like a dwindling number of potential people to draw on or to attract. So, I think we need to obviously be prudent. We need to make sure that we are using the resources that we have well, that we are doing what we can to make ourselves, put ourselves on the map, I guess we could say, and just make people aware of our presence. But I think the most important thing, of course, is just faithfulness. And I think I'm convinced that if we are faithful and we are able to communicate or make it clear to people that we who we are and what we stand for, that will attract a significant number of people. Because, like I said, I do think we provide things that no other tradition is able to provide, at least in total. And I think that the main problem that we have is just invisibility, I think. Right? So it's just a lot of people are not aware of who we are. They're not aware of what we teach. And that's partly because, Lutheranism, it does have, sometimes it has kind of a standoffish posture, and that's partly because we want to keep our doctrine pure, right?
Right.
So we have not typically engaged as much with like broader American Christianity as a lot of other churches have.
Right.
But that's all been in the interest of making sure that we remain true to ourselves and we don't become something that we're not. So, there's pros and cons there, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But it's understandable why we do that. But I do think that one thing that means is that we need to work extra hard probably in trying to make other Christians and other people outside of our walls know who we are and what we're about. Because obviously if they don't know what we're up to, they don't know what we stand for, they don't know what we teach, then, we'll be invisible to them and they'll just pass by and when they're looking for history, they'll go to Rome or they'll go to an Eastern Orthodox church or something. And when they're looking for, church that emphasizes the solas or emphasizes the justification is, by grace through faith, they'll maybe go to a Baptist church or something. So
Right.
it's just a matter of, I think, getting our message out and making it clear to people who we are and that we do offer something that no other church does. It's not like we're, so many people, I think, have the impression that churches are just kind of interchangeable, like one is as good as another,
Yeah.
And that's only the case if your expectations or your standards are very low, or you're just looking for something that's like lowest common denominator Christianity. If you have a deep concern for theology or for sound doctrine, if you want to be in a church that has, like I've said numerous times already, a strong sense of who they are and what they stand for, we definitely stand out in that regard.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes hard to explain to people, even sometimes people that are raised up in church, how distinct Lutheranism is as opposed to other that we're word and sacrament church that emphasizes those things, and the pulpit and the altar have kind of equal standing in there, and we are a sacramental church, believe in the real presence, which you don't find any other place. I mean, Roman Catholicism, we kind of mirror that in some ways, but not really a church of the word, and different views on sacraments. Non-denominational, definitely not sacramental. And so we're kind of that, our doctrine of predestination is very distinctly different from any other denomination. Our doctrine of salvation is in some ways, because of how we believe the Holy Spirit does that, is distinctly different. And so we're not really interchangeable in that sense.
Right, and if you go somewhere else, you will be losing things that you only get here. And that's something I think people are not conscious enough of, or they're not aware enough of that. Because obviously we do have a problem in the Lutheran tradition with retention. That's probably, and that's true of a lot of our churches. I'm not saying it's just our problem, but a lot of the people that grow up in our churches, they end up going elsewhere. They end up, dropping out. And I think that, that's deeply unfortunate, and it's a very sad fact. But I think it comes down to the fact that for some reason, whatever reason, those people didn't grasp the richness of what they had.
Right.
So they were willing to throw it away. And, I don't know if the reason for that was that the catechesis was not adequate, or they just didn't have the right environment at home or at church or whatever. But we need to be very diligent about making sure that our youth understand why we affirm these things and why we do things the way that we do. Because if they understand the why, then they'll realize, at least one can hope, they'll realize, oh, well, if I go to this church, I'm not going to have that. I'm going to lose that. And hopefully they'll realize just what a gift and how precious are the things that we have here. And that will lead them to, be more committed to this tradition and understand its value. I think that one bright side, I guess, or we've been talking about some things that are kind of unfortunate and things that could lead to quite a bit of sorrow or dismay. But one bright side is that I think our tradition does attract a lot of converts. So I have heard that even though we lose a lot of our youth, we attract a lot of people from other churches. And I think that that's because, like I said, like we've been saying, we do offer something that no one else does. And that's why I think we have success in that regard. But to have more success, and obviously it's not just about getting people from other churches, because I do think that's important. I'm not going to say that, because I don't believe all churches are equal, I'm not going to say that, it's fine wherever you go to church. It doesn't matter. That's not my perspective. So if a Christian leaves another church to come here, I'm going to say that's a good thing. And I think that that's the right thing for them to do. But obviously we also want to make sure that we're reaching people that are unchurched. That's also crucial. And, it's all about somehow getting your message out there, making yourself known to the wider community. And those things are difficult to do. And a lot of people obviously, it's going to be discouraging because a lot of people are just not going to be interested no matter what you do.
Right.
But, you still have to do the work. You still have to put in the effort and see, the Holy Spirit will draw or will move those people that he's going to move.
Yeah, and I mean, everybody that's kind of came in the last few years, the one common denominator they've had, now some of them just moved, they've Lutherans and transferred as Lutherans, but it's always been the liturgy.
Yeah.
And not just from the guys in their 30s, but even from some of the older guys that have come in who were in other churches. And they said, yeah, I just wanted liturgy. There was something missing. And they got introduced to it somehow. They went to church and saw liturgy and went, oh. And
I
they
really
just
like this, yeah.
Yeah, they distinctively realized that there's something to this. And, where they read some history and realized this is how the church has worshiped for 2,000 years. Well, actually even long before that, because that's how the Jews worship was liturgically. And then you see in the book of Revelation, it's very clear that the worship is liturgical in the book of Revelation.
Right.
I mean,
right.
So that seems to be a common denominator because there is this sense of, well, it's historic and I'm participating in worship. What I've always felt when I've went to some of the other churches is that I'm a spectator.
Right.
And that I'm like at the movies. And that I get to sing a little bit, but then the pastor's all the talking, and maybe there's a prayer, but prayer doesn't seem to be a big thing in a lot of those churches. And so all those things, I know as Lutheran, when I go to non-denominational church, I feel like I need to go to church now because I don't have the liturgy, and that's so much a part of worship. And I think people are beginning to realize that. Because that seems to be everybody that's walked through our front door in the last 3 or 4 years. It's like or if they were Lutheran, they're in, kind of liturgical service. And so I think that is actually an attractive thing. So I'm always kind of cautious with our second service and, that we have our liturgy and how contemporary we get.
Right.
So,
yeah, definitely that's something that appeals to a lot of people. It's anything that, and this is just true in general of just human behavior and human nature and human psychology. You don't want to give up what makes you distinctive because that's exactly what helps you to stand out. And these people, if we didn't have anything distinctive about us, it's hard to see, how we would be attracting anybody. Not that you're not a good preacher, but even what's attractive about the preaching is the fact that you are presenting law and gospel and that you are preaching in accordance with the word. So, we have to stay true to ourselves, and that's obviously there are going to be people that are going to be like, that's not for me. And
right.
There's nothing you can do about that.
No.
But I think there are a significant number of people that do find what we're doing appealing and compelling, and I think that there would be a lot more that just don't know who we are and don't know what we do. So, as far as how to address the issue of aging populations and the fact that on the horizon, at least, it looks like we're going to be a smaller congregation. I think that you just have to stay true to who you are, and also do what you can to promote and publicize those things, and make it clear to people that you are giving them something. Or I should say, God is really giving them something through you, that they can't get elsewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, what are your hopes for St. James in this future?
Well, I'd like to see more young people here.
Yeah.
Not to say that having a lot of, gray hair is a sign of wisdom. We've got a lot of wisdom.
Yeah, we do have a lot of wisdom.
So that's a good thing. It's not like you can have too much wisdom. So certainly I value the older people in this congregation, and they have a lot to teach us for sure. But I definitely would like to see more people in their 20s and 30s. That would be wonderful. And I think that that's obviously a key to long-term sustainability.
Right.
So attracting those people is difficult because obviously they want to be with people their own age, and if you don't have it, it's hard to get it. So
yeah, that's true.
But I am hopeful that if we show them that we're doing something that they're not going to find elsewhere, that they will stick with us.
Right. Was there anything I didn't ask you, or anything you wanted to add, or?
Just that it's been a blessing to be here, and I've really been grateful for you and your ministry.
Oh,
We were really we were hoping that someone like you would come.
oh,
Yeah. Before, we had a different pastor when we first came here, and then we had an interim pastor for a little bit.
right.
And, we really just wanted somebody who would be a good fit for our congregation, but also would just be a really good communicator and a really good preacher. And you check those boxes. So I'm just really, really grateful for you and for what you've been able to do here. So thank you.
Well, certainly enjoyed you and Ann having you guys here, and your teaching and stuff like that. And
thank you. Yeah, the
You're an
class has
asset,
been fun.
so,
I love that class. I love everybody in it. We have good conversations.
Yeah.
They're all supportive of kind of where I want to take them or what I
Sure.
would like to discuss with them.
Sure.
So they all like to learn. So it's been a really good group, and I would actually love to get a few more bodies in there
sure.
on Sunday morning, because I do think we're talking about important things. I think set time is important, and so that's another thing that I would like to see happen. Is just more people going to set time and participating.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
For coming in.
Appreciate it, and I hope that you have a good week. And
You too.
it's good talking to you.
You too. Well, thank you for joining us for our 75th anniversary talks, and we will see you next week. Peace out.
Walking these streets, shadows fall, lost in a world, echoes call.
Oh yeah, I would have my
Searching for life, voices true. St. James Church in the heart of the blue. Glorify God, nurture all, share the gospel.
One of the problem too is that oftentimes
Hear the call.
I guess someone's expense, so you don't want to necessarily share it.
St. James, breaking chains.